A warm welcome to the program. I'm Amarachi Ubani. This week we delve into more impacts of the political crisis in Ethiopia as thousands participate in mass rallies across the capital in a show of support for the government of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and his fight against an alliance of rebel forces threatening to march into the city. Things began to go south very quickly last week when the TPLF joined forces with 8 other groups to form an alliance against the government. Before that, there were reports of the TPLF taking over towns and cities around the capital. Their spokesperson later said the capital was not the main goal, but a smooth interim transition. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed himself had been reeling threats against the TPLF and other forces and even asked citizens to take up arms against the government. Meanwhile, the international community is intervening with talks with the Ethiopian government to seek a political solution. We started off a conversation with former Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Nigeria, Ambassador Joe Keshi, on the implications of the crisis in Ethiopia. He's back with us to talk some more about why Nigeria should be concerned. Later, a wrap of 1 week at the climate summit holding in Glasgow. And that's Diplomatic Channel in a wrap. Let's check in now on other discussions in diplomatic circles. We'll be right back.
ECOWAS has imposed sanctions against Mali's transitional leaders after they informed the community they would not be able to hold presidential and legislative elections in February. Mali's interim government, which took power following the military's overthrow of President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta in August 2020, had promised the Economic Community of West African States to oversee an 18-month transition back to democracy, culminating in elections on February the 27th, 2022. ECOWAS first imposed sanctions, including border closures, immediately after last year's coup, but lifted them less than 2 months later after the coup leaders agreed to the 18-month transition. Over in Libya, Prime Minister Abdulhamid Al-Dibelba intends to run for president as official registration for candidates opens on Monday. Libya's High National Elections Commission said on Sunday it would open registration on Monday for candidates in presidential and parliamentary elections that have been mandated by a UN-backed roadmap on December the 24th.
It's about December.
China's second nuclear power unit with Hualong-1, a self-developed third-generation pressurized water reactor, started to fill in nuclear fuel on Monday, a major step to putting the reactor into operation. The number 6 unit in the city of Fuqing in East China's Fujian province began to fill nuclear fuel into its reactor on Friday, and the unit has entered a main system commissioning phase.
Welcome back. Despite the crisis in his country, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed apparently enjoys a lot of support from the people of Ethiopia if the mass rallies held on Sunday in the capital is anything to go by. Fighting that re-emerged in November last year intensified this past week as the Tigray People's Liberation Front reportedly began to overtake towns and cities. They formed an alliance with other rebel groups and are heading for the capital, Addis Ababa.
News about the rebel advancement towards the Ethiopian capital came as video purportedly showed forces from the alliance of 9 groups marching in 2 towns they say they captured over last weekend. The new alliance says it plans to dismantle the government of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed by force or by negotiations, then form a transitional government.
As a response to the mere of crisis facing the various nations of the country and to reverse the harmful effects of Abiy Ahmed's autocratic rule to our peoples and beyond, we have recognized the urgent need to collaborate and join our forces towards a safe transition in the country. Hence, have established the United Front of Ethiopian Federalist and Confederalist Forces. The United Front of Ethiopian Federalist and Confederalist Forces is aligned our collective will towards unified struggle for democracy, equality, and self-determination that benefits us all mutually. We have agreed, among other things, to establish a joint command responsible for all-round engagement and to work jointly towards an all-inclusive national dialogues and the establishment of transitional arrangement with the view of addressing the political crisis affecting the country. Additionally, we have agreed to synchronize and share our human and material resources as is required to expedite the struggle against the tyrannical regime, and to jointly work in apprehending and bringing to justice those officials of the regime and its collaborators in the gross human rights violations and genocidal crimes.
The government has disputed the claims but confirmed TPLF infiltrators killed 100 youths in Kombolcha. On Tuesday, the Prime Minister imposed a 6-month state of emergency with immediate effect, which allows it to order citizens of military age to undergo training and accept military duties. By Wednesday, he pledged to bury the government's blood, quote, with our blood, end quote, as he marks the start of the war in the Tigray region 1 year ago. A moment of silence was observed at the candlelight ceremony to commemorate those killed on November the 3rd, 2020, when forces loyal to the Tigray People's Liberation Front, including some soldiers, seized military bases in Tigray. In response, Abiy sent more troops to the northern region. The conflict has killed thousands of people, forced more than 2 million more from their homes, and left 400,000 people in Tigray facing famine. Although many residents in Addis have maintained their normal daily routines amid the crisis, foreign partners have been advising against travel to Ethiopia and urging voluntary staff to leave as soon as possible. On Sunday, tens of thousands of Ethiopians rallied in Addis Ababa in support of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's government. Some of them denounced the United States, which is among foreign powers calling for a ceasefire as the year-long war intensifies. The United States, the UN Security Council, the African Union, and Kenya and Uganda have called in recent days for a ceasefire. But the Prime Minister's government has pledged to keep fighting to fulfill its responsibility to securing the country. It also urged international partners to stand with Ethiopia's democracy.
Joining me now is former Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Joe Keshi. He joins me from our studio in Abuja. Ambassador Keshi, thank you for joining me today.
Good evening, and thanks for having me.
This crisis between the Tigray people dates back longer than we can imagine, but recent crisis began in November last year with the general elections, and there are many stories telling us what's happened behind the scenes. But concerning the man Abiy Ahmed, would you describe him as a divider or someone who's just politically short-sighted?
I think it's both. I really think it's both. And nothing clearly demonstrates that than the fact that in the last couple of days, so many envoys have been in Addis Ababa. Apart from you hear all the time that the American special envoy is in Addis Ababa. But the truth of the matter is that General Olusegun Obasanjo, or Chief Olusegun Obasanjo, has also been in Ethiopia in the last couple of days from Sudan. And so many people have been talking to this gentleman who has simply refused to be rational and strategic in his thinking in order to resolve the crisis. Instead, he's playing up to some popular, themes that will certainly not help him. When you tell your people to come out and fight, that they must defend Addis Ababa, by every blood they have. You have not provided the people you want to defend Addis Ababa with any arms. If you have so much arms that you can give to everybody in Addis Ababa, why didn't you give it to your military? The rebels are marching in. And so many other, ethnic groups and armed groups have formed alliance with the Tigrans. The Omoros
Oromio
reported that they have circled Addis Ababa, and yet you do not see sense in negotiating and ensuring that some compromise is reached. And that's the problem, when leaders cannot compromise, even when they lose the opportunity to compromise.
Yeah, you mentioned former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo being involved in the talks, and you're correct about that. He's the AU Special Envoy to the Horn of Africa. The U.S. Special Envoy is also in Addis Ababa, and there are other international groups there speaking with Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who had previously rejected all of these international interventions. I did see a report recently that talked about, the atrocities committed by the Tigray People's Liberation Front, who want to overtake government again. Now, with these talks going on, what direction do you think, that these leaders and these negotiators should be focused on?
Look, you have to take into account the reasons for this onslaught. The Tigray people have reasons for what they are doing. They are very unhappy. They claim that they've been marginalized since they lost power a couple of years ago. They've complained of lack of development, of their area, and yet they claim they've done so much, invested so much in Addis Ababa, and nobody has cared to, take a closer look at their area. In fact, they are not the only ones complaining. Virtually almost every ethnic group in the country has one complaint or the other. And that's exactly, what's going on in a number of places when leaders mismanage the diversity. And when leaders, of all sides, by the way, refuse to come together and then give and take and compromise in order to ensure that peace and stability, is maintained and that human life is saved. So the complaints become louder over the years. And I'm sure I sent you a couple of tapes on my way here. You would have seen that this crisis is not yesterday, and that in terms of, the military strength of some of these armed groups, they have been heavily supported by Ethiopians outside the country. This shows you how clearly divided Ethiopia is. This shows you how clearly divided, how clearly the diversity of that country. It's a huge country. I think it comes next in terms of population after Nigeria. It has a large segment of ethnic groups, and the way that it is structured, almost all is unlike us here, where you, for example, you have the Southeast with people speaking different languages and so on. No, almost every group, no matter how small it is, has some control over its territory, and this is why it is so easy to organize things around the ethnic leanings.
Now, you mentioned the similarities between Nigeria and Ethiopia. You mentioned population as well as size, and you also spoke about the implications that what's going on in Ethiopia could also have on Nigeria. This was sometime last week. I just wanted you to speak some more about the implications that might have, so that you could just finish your train of thought.
Well, look, it's not only Nigeria, but it could also provide some fuel, to secessionist agitators in this country. Right now they use other countries as an example. Sometimes they cite Scotland. Sometimes they cite other countries. They cite the division that, the split of Yugoslavia into a number of countries. They've given all kinds of examples. And if Ethiopia goes down, it just fuels the agitation in a number of countries, Nigeria inclusive. And it would just, it will become louder in the sense that they will tell you, they will give an example that, look, if you mismanage diversity, if you continue to marginalize sections of the country, this is the consequences that people will begin to agitate that they want to go. And in fact, this is what the Tigrayans actually want now, that even if they're not so much interested in even returning back to power. Yes, maybe they can be persuaded to be reasonable and rational. But the truth of the matter is that in all pronouncements they've made, and their secret plan is they want an independent state of their own. This could be the final, outcome of, what's going on in Ethiopia if care is not taken. But when that happens, other ethnic groups would also want to, to leave Ethiopia. And Ethiopia will just disappear as we know it. There will no longer be Ethiopia as we know it today if care is not taken. And the consequences is that a number of places where diversity is being mismanaged in the continent, it will just fuel the agitation. It will just give courage, encouragement to, agitators or ethnic agitators or national agitators that, look, if they've done it in Ethiopia, they've gone their separate ways, we can also do it, in our own place. And this is why I sincerely hope that all the overtures that have been made, to the Prime Minister, that he'll be reasonable, he'll be rational, and stop going to the public to arouse public sentiments and the rest of it. No, he needs to sit down as a leader and think through, all these issues seriously and decide on what to do for the sake of the whole country.
The UN has attributed blame on both sides, both the Ethiopian government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front, on atrocities that have been committed on both sides. The Tigrayans, the TPLF on its own people, the Tigrayan Ethiopian forces on the Tigrayans themselves, and then there have been reports that the Tigray People's Liberation Front also attacked, the humanitarian officers and also attacked their own people. Now, when you're looking at, these blames on the two sides, and considering the fact that the TPLF ruled the country for more than 20 years, and now, it's upset about a different ethnic group ruling Ethiopia, and now you say that, they want their own autonomy. Is it really about, autonomy in the end when you see the sequence by which they have gone about this?
Well, look, at the end of the day, to a large extent, yes, but you could also see that, to start with, yes, the United Nations is right. There has been a report that all sides, look, this happens in crisis. All sides are guilty of human rights violation. So it does happen, and nobody can, deny that. But when you begin to look at what's going on, a number of ethnic militias are now joining forces with the Tigrayans, to overtake Addis Ababa. So at the end of the day, that might actually be a saving grace that the Tigrayans might say, okay, if we have recaptured power, we might not totally go. But if they had not done this, if they've not come so far as close to, Addis Ababa, perhaps there could be some salvation. The Oromos, I think, the largest group, have also joined forces with them. So you can see what is playing out in that country, that it's not just a question of one side wanting to go, that the anger, the unhappiness is completely widespread in a number of areas. And this goes back to the inability of the government of the day to manage all these nuances, around the country in order to ensure national, unity and stability.
A pleasure always speaking with you. Thank you for joining me on Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you for having me. Thanks.
Days after the start of COP26 in Glasgow, The UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson said ministers and negotiators should pull together and drive for the line to secure ambitious action on climate change. He says countries must be ready to make bold compromises and ambitious commitments needed at the final week of the climate summit.
You know, the rubber is going to hit the road.
The UK Prime Minister's words were echoed by COP26 President Alok Sharma, who said negotiators must make an extra push to ensure sufficient progress is made to allow a successful outcome this week.
The one thing that I will remind absolutely every colleague of as part of the negotiations is what their leaders said at the start of this summit, where they said that we should work together, that we should build consensus, and that we should try and keep 1.5 within reach. And I hope that is the spirit with which negotiators will continue to approach these discussions.
In a separate note published by the United Nations, Sharma said it would not be possible for a large number of unresolved issues to continue into the conference's second week. Earlier in the week, he said climate finance pledges by wealthy nations would likely exceed $500 billion between 2021 and 2025 in aggregate. In 2009, the developed countries most responsible for global warming pledged to provide $100 billion per year by 2020 to help developing nations deal with its consequences. The presidents of Ghana and Madagascar were among leaders of developing countries who criticized wealthier nations for failing to honor their pledge. President Nana Akufo-Addo called on nations to do more.
Those same nations are, however, insisting that we abandon the opportunity for rapid development of our economies. That would be tantamount to enshrining in the global community inequality of the highest order, a totally unacceptable conclusion.
During the meetings, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari announced Nigeria's commitment to net zero carbon emissions by 2060. He said officials are working to ensure a more stable energy market and have developed a detailed energy transition plan and roadmap, but says attaining the global climate goal would require financial support to developing countries.
Nigeria has an approved national action plan on gender and climate change. This document incorporates priority areas of our economic recovery and growth plan and nationally determined contributions. The implementation strategy for this national action plan has been developed. In a bid to commit to transitional change through climate policy, the revised national policy on climate change was approved in June 2021. This will enable us to implement mitigation measures and also strengthen adaptation towards a sustainable climate-resilient development pathway in Nigeria. Mr. President, I would like to state that attaining national and global climate change goals will require adequate and sustained technical and financial support to developing countries. In Nigeria, in the area of energy access, Nigeria's commitment to a just transition is reflected in our ambitious energy compact, which includes the government's flagship project to electrify 5 million households and 25 million people using decentralized solar energy solutions. This is a major step towards closing our energy access deficit.
About 100 nations pledged to cut emissions of methane as part of efforts to contain global warming. The announcement was made by U.S. President Joe Biden during the summit. The number was up from 9 nations that had signed on as of September.
So together, we're committing to collectively reduce our methane by 30% by 2030, and I think we could probably go beyond that. We just announced this package at the General Assembly and back in September. At the time, as mentioned, 9 countries had signed on. Today, it's over 80. It's approaching 100 countries that are signing on.
While leaders may have given themselves a pat on the back as regards progression of talks, youth activists held protests calling for an end to what they called meaningless summits.
Many schools are being destroyed because of extreme weather events. I need someone to tell me how to explain to farmers who are losing their crops and farms because of droughts and floods that seem to never end. And leaders continue to open up new coal power plants, construct oil pipelines, and frack gas without paying attention and listening to the voices crying out for help because of the destruction that is happening. That leaders have failed to understand that we cannot eat coal, we cannot drink oil, and we cannot breathe so-called natural gas.
This is where we end the program today. Don't forget to join us next time. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.